Swerve Strickland goes on a podcast, the Bootleg Kev podcast, to compare WWE and AEW. But he says some things that I thought were very eyebrow raising. So I'm going to talk about this. And it's the comparison quote that has been floating around. Because at first I didn't get it. And then I had to do a little extra digging in order to understand it for myself. So here's what he said. It's almost like you get the big box office movies and all that stuff over there. But over there, you don't get green screen. You don't get wires. Can you freaking act? That's what AEW is. You have to act in order to perform in our films. We're A24. The performances and acting have to be pristine. You can enjoy both, and both are successful. That's the beauty of it. So, I'm guessing the acting is the wrestling part. I'm guessing that's what he means. I don't think he literally means acting. I think he means that, and I had to go and look up what A24 is all about, and it's an independent movie house, okay? And independent, art house movies and all this kind of stuff is known for probably having better acting than, generic box office slop that you see in Marvel movies or other big budget films that are more concerned with making money. All right. It's more artistic. You have to take the opportunity. There's a lot more risks and stuff like this. But I found it ironic that he would use A24 as an example, considering when I looked up A24, one of the very first goddamn things I saw was an article in Vulture that says, "The cult of A24. The iconoclastic studio has bred superfans, dropped swag, and perfected a house style. It's also teetering on the verge of self-parody." I don't think Swerve Strickland nailed this thing on purpose, but this is a goddamn bullseye, right? When you look at, there's two different articles. There's another one from Junkie. It says how A24 became the ultimate film cult. So there's people within the film fandom, the people who watch movies, who thinks that A24 is a cult. And guess what? There's people here in the wrestling community who think that AEW is a cult. Wow. What a coinky dink. Right? This is absolutely delightful. So let's go through this Vulture article. Let's see how many similarities we can find between AEW and A24. So it says, ask A24 fans to describe what unites them. And they'll use words like eclectic, eccentric, immersive, and authentic. There's a certain sleight of hand involved, as not everything A24 has put out is great. But the magic of the brand was that over time, it has been able to sell the idea of A24 as synonymous with originality, idiosyncrasy, and prestige. Not a movie, but a film. Hey, that kind of feels like what we're dealing with here in AEW, right? All the matches are 4.5 stars, 5 stars. They just did a pay-per-view, right? With they had 3 5-star matches on that show, right? A bunch of the other matches were 4.5 stars. Even one of the worst main events in AEW history was 3.5 stars or something like that. Leading people to believe that AEW puts on the best wrestling matches, high prestige wrestling matches. These are cinematic in-ring performances of the highest caliber. But not everything is good. And, these movies quite often flop. But they have the veneer within their fandom that everything is great. So it says, this is another piece of the article. This is from Vulture. The world of independent film is a place ambitious new companies go to die. The startup costs are high. The financial rewards are slim. If an indie studio is lucky, it staves off bankruptcy long enough to get bought by a major corporation. The founding premise of A24 was to avoid this fate by spending far less on traditional advertising like billboards and TV spots and focus on turning films into viral sensations. Interesting, because this is the same for pro wrestling, isn't it? Most indie promotions tank. They go out of business or they get bought up by some, bigger promotion, usually like a WWE or like when Ring of Honor got purchased by AEW, right? And then he says that the founding premise was to avoid this fate by spending far less on traditional advertising like billboards and TV and instead turning films into viral sensations. Isn't that interesting that AEW always has their matches have these gigantic clips in them? Now that's true of wrestling in general, but they loved, poking out clips of Commander doing his 360 blah, blah, blah on Collision, or Will Ospreay doing a Spanish fly at the top of the cage, and making people believe like this match is awesome because look at this 10-second clip, look at this GIF, it's amazing. But if you sit down and watch that thing, you'll be incredibly bored because that's not the finish of the match. It's just one of the many, many, many high spots tucked away in that thing somewhere. But I do find this interesting. What an interesting, absolutely delightful comparison we got here. So it says, it's continuing here. It says most important of these, I guess what the things was the merch. From the beginning, A24 demonstrated an ability to transmute its sense of taste into physical objects. A24 merchandise became the company's most visible means of brand extension. Like all the AEW t-shirts. Remember, we used to call AEW a t-shirt company, right? Because it didn't have any matches, it didn't have TV or anything like that at the time. And they were constantly shell t-shirts, Young Bucks merchandise. And nobody buys a WWE shirt. Nobody just buys a shirt with WWE on it. Usually they buy a shirt of a wrestler. But they're in AEW, they'll sell a shirt that just says AEW. So it's almost like, yeah, they want people to see them in AEW shirts. They want people to chant AEW, AEW, AEW. Interesting. I'm seeing a lot of similarities here. That's just one article. So, Junkie, they says that the way some fans act about A24 feels like an edgier version of Disney adults, in the same way that adult fans of Disney don't even blink at paying up thousands of dollars for exclusive merch. A24 fans have been known to pay upwards of $50 for a candle or even $35 for a tote bag simply to rep the brand. To a degree, you can also compare this to WWE as well with the ticket prices and how everything is skyrocketing in WWE. But this is also an issue for in AEW. There was people who were proudly talking about how they flew from Florida to Las Vegas just to go to Double or Nothing. And you're like, ugh, that's gross. But that's how it was. So there's a lot of similarities between A24 and AEW. I'm not even going to get into the acting portion because that's all subjective. Whether people like the wrestling about WWE or they prefer the wrestling of AEW, it depends on what you're looking for. WWE gives you more traditional storytelling, in between the ropes. Guys actually, collar and elbow tie up. Guys actually utilize headlocks. They actually sell things more often than not. While AEW is more action oriented. Everybody's a superhuman in some way. But except for the way they dress and the way they talk on the mic, where they're painfully normal. And then they'll get in the ring and, you can hit him with an atomic bomb and he'll kick out at 1 1/4 while damn near bleeding to death. It's, just things that don't make sense. But if Swerve Strickland wanted to say that AEW is a cult indie company, then he nailed it. That's exactly what it is. It is a cult indie company. It is sadly one of those things that the wrestling fan of the early 2000s who never quite grew up, much like those Disney adults, who never grew up and they still go to Disney at, 45 or whatever. These guys are still super fans of Ring of Honor and 1995 All Japan Pro Wrestling, and they want to watch that stuff on American television and don't understand why you don't like it. Like, what you mean you don't like Tomohiro Ishii? He's awesome. Like Minoru Suzuki, the guy from Pancrase in the 80s, he's amazing. It's like, what are you talking about? Nobody knows who this guy is. Why is he eating up so much of our TV time? Hechicero, look, he might be the greatest wrestler of all time. That ain't the point at this right now. He shouldn't be in the main event of your show. Now, I don't know much about movies. I just know what I like. So I can't tell you what A24 movies are really good and which ones are shite. But I can tell you that if Swerve meant to compare the two, well, he knocked it right out of the goddamn park. It's a cult. It's an indie wrestling cult. It is the culmination. 25 years ago, it was ECW. All the runoff from ECW went into CZW and XPW and Ring of Honor and all of that. And it built up from there. From Full Impact Pro to PWG to all of the guys who went over to Japan and came back to Ring of Honor, even a little bit into TNA. AEW is the pinnacle of indie wrestling garbage, okay? It has all the trappings and they're very proud of it. They have death matches and, what we complained about, those of us who are consistent about TNA's X Division, they got that in AEW. What we complained about, those of us who are consistent about death matches, they got that in AEW. So from what I read about A24, they just jump from genre to genre, and they do basically indie films in all different types of genres. Almost exactly the same as AEW. They like to jump in all these different genres and try to bring them all under one umbrella. But that ends up with a very niche audience that, is very passionate about what you do. But everybody else is looking at that like, that's for you guys. This is not for everybody else. So have fun with that. And they are routinely frustrated by the fact that other people just don't have fun with it. Or they make fun of it. But I'm not going to take what Swerve said literally. Like, can you act? Can you perform? Like, most of you guys cannot act. Your acting is trash. But that's pro wrestling in general. Pro wrestlers are not actors. They have to act, because that's what selling is. That's what, promoing somebody is. You have to, have emotion and be able to communicate. But, ultimately, you do have to accept that they're pro wrestlers. They're not trained thespians. So things are not going to be perfect. Ultimately, what Swerve is trying to say, and I think they did this, another comparison, where they said WWE is like Chicago Fire, while AEW is like The Wire. And another one was, I think another comparison was that AEW is like Top Dog Entertainment, and WWE is like Drake. And I'm like, wait a second. You mean your auntie is a man now? Is that what you're telling me? Which one of you dudes is Ab Soul, by the way? Which one of you is Schoolboy Q? I think you guys are really feeling yourselves very, very much. I think what we're looking at here is, one is mainstream and popular. The other one is sort of niche and they're gritty, quote unquote. But that's just because, they like to blade all the time. And that's really where the grit comes from. They're, in fact, quite conservative in what they actually do in AEW, with the exception of the blood. They don't really like to do too many personal stories, especially stories that really, push buttons. They don't really go there. But hey, this is what they think about themselves, and I can't tell them what to think about themselves. But if you look at AEW stories, the reason why Mariah May and Toni Storm jumps out the way that it does is because of the way the story was told, and the bleeding, and the blade, and the time that they gave it. The reason why Swerve and Hangman stands out because of how far they went in the story, and because of the time that they gave it. AEW doesn't always do this stuff. It's not a recurring thing for AEW, and it's not a regular thing for them. It was until recently a regular thing for WWE for them to either do storylines that disgust people or storylines that really get people emotionally invested. Most recently was the Naomi, Bianca Belair, and Jade Cargill angle that they pulled recently, which was all based on pulling the strings of the relationship between those three characters. Now, if you want to say which one's better in terms of that storyline or the Mariah May Toni Storm, I think that they're pretty much equal because the story is about the relationship between the characters involved, and that's what pro wrestling should be. I do think that AEW, to sometimes they can go to the extreme of like blood drinking and spitting on each other, and all that stuff feels very unnecessary. It feels very edgy for edgy's sake. But I think Swerve told the truth by accident that AEW is a cult, and you as an AEW fan are trapped inside of a cult. I would suggest you listen to this boy, listen to the boy, and smarten up. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, we just gonna